Welcome to Euranet Plus, Big Crunch Debate from Brussels. We're joined today by Frans Timmermans, first Vice-President of the European Commission. We're going to be discussing Brexit, the financial crisis, the rule of law, and other issues to do with the state that Europe's in today. We'll be joined by correspondents from across the Euranet network today. And here in the studio, we have Olivier Henrion from RTBF, the Belgian broadcaster. We'll also be announcing the poll results that we've taken from across Europe, 5,000 participants, and the results you will see for the first time today. The theme today that we put across the poll as well is what went wrong with Europe. Commissioner Timmermans, what went wrong with Europe?
Oh, I think we're now at the tail end of 8 years of deep economic crisis, followed by security crisis, migration crisis. So this conflagration of crises has hit Europe hard, and the reaction to that is not always to stand together as Europeans, but also to look for individual solutions, which I think will not work. So in general, I believe we are trying to cope with a conflagration of crises, and that's not always easy for Europe.
What's your biggest concern? What's the one thing that stands out? If that was fixed, a lot of the other problems would go away.
Well, I think at the end of the day, at the heart of all of this is the question whether middle classes in Europe still feel optimistic about the future, yes or no. So it's about jobs, it's about opportunities for their kids, it's about good education, good healthcare. I think the other problems, although they are very serious, would be lessened if we can bring back some optimism about the future.
Let's listen to our correspondent from BFM Business, Jan Antonin Nogues. He has a question for you.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I have a question for you. At the beginning of the European project, Europe was seen as a solution, especially against war, obviously. It was seen as protecting Europe, but as time went by, Europe seems to have become a problem rather than a solution, at least in the public opinion. Many people feeling that the euro has made life more expensive, that Europe exposes to unfair competition, to all sorts of social dumping, to uncontrolled migrations because notably of the lack of borders. Europe doesn't seem to protect as much as it exposes to risk. And in your opinion, has the EU failed to deliver protection, or is it this feeling, is it simply a failure of communication on the EU's part?
Oh, I wish it were just a failure of communication. No, it's unfortunately much deeper than that. Globalization is something that has hit the world very hard, and Europe more than other continents, because we're an aging continent. We are facing quite a number of big economic restructuring challenges. And what Europe has been doing, the European Union, is constantly over-promising and under-delivering, and that has led to people being disappointed. And the funny thing is, we over-promise, then we under-deliver, and to compensate, we make even bigger promises. And I think we need a more modest Europe, a more solution-oriented Europe. Fix the small problems, and you will start fixing the big problem as well. But stop over-promising. Be modest in what you can do. And the funny thing is, although people are angry with Europe for not solving certain issues, a majority of Europeans still attach importance to the European project, and they don't want to stop with it.
We dealt, first of all, with a financial crisis, and now we're in the middle of the refugee crisis, which seems to massively play on people's minds, even far more than the financial crisis. Let's take a look at the first poll result that we have on this as well. In response to the refugee crisis, the EU has A, failed to uphold its historical responsibilities, B, created a game changer with the new EU-Turkey agreement, or C, has opened its borders too wide for asylum seekers. Our 5,000 respondents said 46.1% failed to uphold its historical responsibilities. That's a big number. The second is 18.6%, created a game changer with the new EU-Turkey agreement, so some support for that. And 35.3% has opened its doors too wide for asylum seekers. You have such a complex mesh of issues to deal with, but the central, as you said, the EU project, it seems to have failed to uphold its historical responsibilities. How do you address that?
I think that's actually a very positive result, because it means that 46% of the people want us to do better, at holding up our historical responsibilities, which I think they mean is making sure we do the right thing in terms of saving people who might drown or providing protection for people who flee from war and persecution. So I feel very much encouraged to continue with our work. I fully understand the hesitations with the EU-Turkey agreement because it doesn't feel comfortable to be doing this with a neighbor who internally has some very, very clear challenges in terms of human rights and the rule of law. But I think it is inevitable. I always ask people who criticize the agreement, how would you have stopped this terrible drowning of people in the Aegean Sea? How would you have stopped Greece becoming a huge refugee camp with hundreds of thousands of people unless you make an agreement with Turkey? And nobody has given me an answer to that question.
Let's go to our Greek correspondent, Stavros Samoulidis with Sky Media. Stavros, are you there?
Hello, thank you for having me. Dear Vice President, you've already seen the results of the poll, so there's a general feeling regarding the refugee crisis that Europe has failed to respond to this major challenge, and over 6 out of 10 Greeks are also acknowledging quoting the historical failure by the EU. Recently, we heard the Bulgarian foreign minister arguing for the first time, at least openly, publicly, that Europe should be considering a plan B in case the deal with Turkey collapses. And so with this last hypothesis being ever more plausible today, could you say to us if the European Union is or should be examining an alternative to a solution based solely on Turkey?
Well, of course, the solution is not solely based on Turkey. Look at the incredible achievements of Greece in the last couple of months. We've been working closely together with the Greek authorities and achieving good results. We used to have, on average, more than 3,000 people crossing the Aegean every day, people drowning in the Aegean every day. Now we're down to 50 people on average every day, and no people drowning. Don't dismiss that achievement. I think it's a huge achievement, both thanks to Greece and Turkey. And let's work on that basis. Let's be very clear on what we expect from each other, but let's continue, because if we turn this into a success, I'm sure it could be a template for other agreements with other countries, for instance, in the southern Mediterranean, where we now also see challenges.
Let's go to Gigi Donnelly. He has a question from Radio 24 in Italia.
Hello, Mr. Timmermans and all my colleagues. My question is concerning what is already happening on the European southern border with the Mediterranean, which concern Italy on a first stage, but obviously involved in all 28 countries. So as we might imagine, the closing of the so-called Balkan route is producing a major pressure on Italian southern border. So, Mr. Timmermans, do you have the impression that this time European Union will be able to give an answer as a common body, as an organized structure, or once again we will see just passing from one border to the other with a lot of discussion, a lot of would-be walls and many distances among the member states?
Well, frankly, I'm rather optimistic. First of all, let's not make a one-on-one. This is not because of the closing of the Balkan route or of the agreement with Turkey, because if you look at the people arriving in Italy, most of these people are not Syrians, but are coming from Africa. But this phenomenon is indeed a challenge. I think we need long-term policies for people who are not refugees but economic migrants to be returned to their countries of origin. To do that, we need to work with these countries to give them incentives by creating investment opportunities and doing other things. The Commission will be coming out with ideas based on the Italian compact, which was developed by Matteo Renzi. We will be coming with ideas next week. We will present them next week. And I believe we can come up with a long-term sustainable solution to this issue. So let's not be too pessimistic. I think this can be fixed. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be long-term, but we can do it.
Do you think that Matteo Renzi's project of migration bonds, this idea, and Belgium's looking at this as well, is this something that the European Commission can coordinate across Europe, or should this be done unilaterally by the member states?
Well, the issue is that this will need financing. That is quite clear. Now, I think it is not important whether this is done with bonds or non-bonds. I think the idea of bonds is going to be difficult to get agreed by all member states. But that we need to have a project with serious financing over a longer period of time is quite clear. And there, Matteo Renzi and I are in full agreement.
Let's go to Polski Radio and our correspondent Joachim Syczerski. Joachim.
Good afternoon from Warsaw. Poland, together with the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, are against refugee quotas. Commissioner Timmermans, why do you think that all of the EU countries should accept the refugees, even against the will of a significant part of citizens and against the will of the significant part of refugees themselves, who are not really eager to move to the mentioned countries?
First of all, I think we can. The failure of our refugee policy is a consequence of not showing any form of solidarity for many years with countries like Italy and Greece that were the recipients of huge numbers of refugees. So the only sustainable solution to this problem, if a country is overrun by refugees and gets much more than their fair share of refugees, is to have a distribution system so that we share that responsibility across the European Union. And member states should not be excluded from that. I don't see any reason why member states should be excluded from that. Secondly, and let me be very clear about this, somebody who asks for international protection because he or she flees from war and persecution has a right to protection, but does not have the right to choose the country where they get that international protection. And if you want international protection in the European Union, you don't get to decide where you get that international protection. So that is another principle that should be upheld. And I think all member states can count on solidarity if a member state is in trouble. And I think that solidarity should be forthcoming, because if we dispute the principle of solidarity, once another member state gets into trouble and asks solidarity of the one that didn't get it in the previous phase, that one will no longer want to give solidarity in return. So if we go down that road and we create a negative spiral of not wanting to solve each other's problems, then the whole idea of the European Union will be weakened in a serious way.
President Juncker highlighted that Schengen is the hallmark of what Europe is about to a large degree, and Schengen is struggling to hold together at the moment. Let's take a look at this in more detail. Olivia, you have a question for the Commissioner?
Yes, Commissioner. Several EU countries restored border controls without much reaction, actually, from EU citizens, not to say without any reaction from EU citizens. This is probably the sign that freedom of movement, which is often presented as a pillar of the European Union, is not seen as such by European citizens, don't you think?
Well, I tend to disagree with you. If Schengen would collapse permanently, then the economic effects would be huge, and every single European citizen would feel the economic effect when traveling themselves, or also because they would see prices go up. So that we need to avoid. Temporarily, in a refugee crisis, member states have the full right to impose border controls. What we need to do now is to make sure that our external borders are much better protected, that people who arrive at our external borders are immediately registered, identified, and then we can put an end to internal border controls. If we do what we have proposed as Commission, by the end of this year, there will be no more need for internal border controls. And I think that is the situation we want to achieve.
Let's take a look at our second poll on Schengen. See what our citizens said. Should we preserve the EU's freedom of movement? A, yes, it shall not be restricted. B, yes, but restrictions should be applied if the situation asks. And no, with increasing terrorist threats, freedom of movement should be restricted. And our respondents said 38.9% said yes, it shall not be restricted. And then we have 44.4% said yes, but restrictions should be applied if the situation asks. So we should be keeping freedom of movement in general. And 16.5% said no, with increasing terrorist threats, freedom of movement should be restricted. That give you some comfort?
Yes, actually it does, because a vast majority of the people participating in the poll want us to maintain freedom of movement, even if half of them, more than half of them, want it to be done with restrictions, which is exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're doing. And, the very fact that we do strengthen our external border controls, the very fact that we do impose increasingly the use of biometric data in passports, the fact that we are stricter in exchanging information about those people who enter Europe is indeed, yes, but restrictions should be applied. So in that sense, we move exactly in the same direction as the majority of your pollers want.
Are you concerned that the freedom of movement comes at a price in terms of a lack of privacy, in terms of our personal data?
Well, I think security challenge. There's always going to be a debate about the balance between data protection and security. And in a democracy, in a rule of law democracy, striking the right balance is always going to be a challenge for politicians. And there is no black and white here. You can't have full freedom without control. You can't have complete state control and then limit individual liberties. So, striking that balance correctly is our job.
Let's listen to a question from Barbara Paranek from HRT, our partner in Croatia.
Hello from Zagreb. As you know, Croatia is still not a member of the Schengen area. However, the country is implementing reforms to meet the technical criteria as soon as possible. At the same time, we're witnessing a trend of increased reintroduction of border controls among Schengen member states. So what do you think? What kind of message is that not only to Croatia, but to the other countries in the Schengen waiting room?
Well, I think the message is clear. If we want Schengen to work, we need to be sure that we have fully functional external border control. We need a European Coast and Border Guard. And if we are sure that we do a good job at our external borders, we can be completely relaxed about the Schengen zone and internal borders. And that is something that I know Croatia is working on with great determination. And if there is, if they meet the criteria, and if we have full confidence in the external border control, there is no reason why Croatia could not become a member of the Schengen zone.
Yesterday, Boris Johnson was advocating an Australian-style system for immigration, and part of Britain isn't even in the Schengen area, but this idea that people are afraid of who's coming into the country and moving across Europe quite freely. Do you think that there are better controls that can be applied, which aren't even on the table at the moment?
Well, I think the United Kingdom already has the possibility to do this on a national basis, not being part of that cooperation at the European level. So I believe they have all the possibilities they need to act in that area. And I think, other proposals, I haven't seen them. They're just ideas. I didn't see concrete proposals. And I'm not going to react to things that are just ideas at this stage. If we see concrete proposals or ideas, we might be able to react to them. But at this stage, it's impossible for us to give a reaction.
Actually, the issues of Brexit are throwing up at the moment. Britain was often accused of being the one outside the mainstream of Europe. But then we see Poland and Hungary and other countries responding in fairly similar fashion as well in terms of how they receive migrants coming into the country, for example. When you look at Brexit, are you concerned that the migration has really overtaken the whole idea of Europe?
Well, frankly, I don't think so. And I don't really see a comparison between Britain and the other countries you mention. Britain has a very, very diverse and very, very vibrant community and society. Britain historically is open to the whole world, not just to Europe. And if you look at the success in arts, in science, in the economy, you see people from all over the world creating the personal success, but also adding huge value to the British society, British economy. So I believe that Britain could be an example to many other countries where perhaps they have no experience with diversity and they therefore fear diversity, but they could see the enormous addition, the enormous enrichment of society that can be created by diversity.
Olivia, you have a question on Brexit?
Yes, I was in the UK a few weeks ago, and I'm afraid you're not very popular over there, nor is Mr. Juncker. Basically, the EU is seen as a scapegoat.
Absolutely wrong. I'm
for
very
everything.
popular in the United Kingdom.
So the EU is a scapegoat for everything. I was told by people that the pothole in the street was because of the EU,
Yes,
that
of
the
course.
long queue in hospitals was because of the EU.
The rain is because of the
As
EU.
well, yes.
Yeah.
Clearly, it seems that many British voters don't know exactly what is the role of the EU, and this could be also the case in Belgium, in France, in the Netherlands. So how can we build a European Union if its own citizens don't know exactly what is the role of the EU?
Well, I can't, talk about what all citizens should be doing or thinking. I think I can talk about what politicians should be doing. And I think politicians should stop doing the same thing they've been doing for decades now. Everything that goes right is done at a national level, and everything that goes wrong is to blame on the European Union. If you continuously say that to your population over long periods of time, and this is something that's been done in all member states, then you can't expect that population to be very positive about the European Union, can you? So I think much will depend on the willingness of national politicians to be more honest about the achievements they attain, and not just to give the blame to Europe if something goes wrong and take the opportunity to congratulate themselves if something goes right.
The EU didn't play a role in this.
Of course, we're all responsible. I'm not just talking to the others, I'm talking to myself as well. The combination, as I said earlier, of over-promising and under-delivering on the one hand, and of blaming Europe for everything that goes wrong on the other hand, has created Euroscepsis, if not Europhobia, in many of our member states.
You wrote recently about ties that bind, a long paper on this, and part of what you touch on is the financial crisis and the damage that is done. Let's go to our next poll and see how our respondents mark this. How do you think the European Union managed the financial crisis? A, badly, locked in a too little and too late strategy. B, Europeans had to suffer too much from austerity policies. And C, the EU has proved its resilience capacities by building up a banking union. And our citizens responded with, this is 47% said too little and too late strategy. That's pretty damning, don't you think?
Yes.
Europeans had to suffer too much austerity, 34.9%. The policy mix here seemed really badly wrong. And 18.1%, the EU has proved its resilience by building up a banking union. All that effort and no appreciation for the banking union. How do you get the confidence back when you look at the financial crisis in this context?
Well, I think only by showing that the recipe can be improved by having more investment, by showing that unemployment is down, economic growth is up, which are facts, by showing that we're doing better this year than other parts of the world. But, confidence, self-confidence, once you're down and out, self-confidence to come back takes a long, long time and takes a lot of evidence before people believe it, especially because we've been over-promising and under-delivering. So before people have more trust in the project will take some time. And I do believe that Europe did too little and too late. And I believe it is because we didn't trust each other in Europe. There was a huge level of moral hazard. The north of Europe not believing that the south of Europe was willing to work hard to dig itself out of the hole. The south of Europe believing the north of Europe was just imposing recipes that were only good for the north of Europe, but did not help the south of Europe. So there was a lot of mistrust between European nations, and that is not a good recipe to find common solutions. And I think that's why we were too slow and too late.
One common solution that the Juncker Commission proposed at the very beginning was the Juncker Investment Plan, which was less about politics and more about concrete projects. Do we need to see more of that, and how is the project going?
Well, the project is doing very well, thank you very much, because we are now past the 100 billion mark of investment. The interesting thing is that the leverage we thought it would create of about 1 to 15 turns out to be 1 to 23, which is even much more. And we were criticized, you're far too optimistic, it's not going to happen. And it's 1 to 23. So for every euro public money, 23 euro investment. And that is a huge effect. And I think it is also because for the first time, this investment goes directly to a whole range of small and medium-sized enterprises. This is money that's not going just to the big boys and girls. It's actually going to the smaller enterprises. And that is hugely important for employment in Europe. Unfortunately, not in all member states, but in France, for instance, this is a huge success.
Let's go to our German correspondent, Claudia Knopke, AMS. Claudia.
Hello from Germany, and I would like to go back to the reliability, coping with a crisis through reliability. And I'm afraid I have to beg your pardon for my real German question when it's about respecting the rules and so on, because the euro crisis is above all a debt crisis. And now the EU Commission let deficit sinners such as Spain and Portugal for now off the hook. So my question is, why are established criteria or stuck to them if they are not respected?
I would dispute your initial remark that the crisis is a debt crisis. It is at least as much a crisis in a lack of investment, in a lack of economic growth, in a lack of tax responsibility. We could be getting much more tax if people would just pay taxes, if big corporations wouldn't be off the hook all the time. So let's not limit this to a debt crisis. Of course, we need and responsible fiscal policies and less public debt and more investment. But you cannot cripple investment simply by only looking at debt. And I believe if you look at the situation in our member states, the policy mix we're looking for now from the European Commission, if you look at our recommendations, is much more oriented towards developing the social sector, looking at healthcare, education, creating employment. I think we're in that phase now and not just in the phase of talking about debt. Having said that, I don't dismiss the problem of debt. We went from an average of 60%, I think, more or less, before the crisis of a debt GDP ratio. We're now over 100% on average of debt GDP ratio. That is, living at the expense of our children if we're not very careful. We need to fix that, but that is not unlogical in the context of the deepest economic crisis since the 1930s.
Okay, let's move along to the rule of law, which is intrinsically tied to this. Some people criticize the Commission, saying, as Claudia has highlighted, that the budget deficit procedure, it really risked the whole concept of the rule of law. But most people today, and including yourself, have been focused on Poland and the constitutional issues, systemic threats as well. How have the negotiations with Poland been going?
Well, in the last 4 months, we've been talking with the Polish authorities in a constructive way. The issue pertaining to the position of the Constitutional Tribunal, I think, has been made very clear. We want to prevent any systemic threat to the rule of law in any member state, including Poland. So we're looking for a way out. Today, we have given our opinion to the Polish government where we see a possibility for them to find a way out. But at the end of the day, it is for the Polish authorities with the other parties in Poland to find a solution to this crisis. We can only advise them, give them an indication where we believe they would be in conformity with the rule of law. I will continue this dialogue. I understand the Polish authorities also want to continue this dialogue, and I hope we can present a result very soon.
The Justice Minister, Zbigniew Ziobro, he announced after the opinion today, I think we have the quote, if we can listen to it just now as well.
Potwierdza to niestety narrację tych wszystkich, którzy mówią, że Komisja Europejska...
By this decision, you can clearly see that the European Commission is taking part in Poland's home affairs. The Commission is supporting the Polish opposition and is acting against the Polish government. This pressure that is made by the Commission against Poland has a second layer. The Commission wants to force us in taking thousands of illegal immigrants.
...aby zgodzić się na przyjmowanie dziesiątków tysięcy, czy w perspektywie setek tysięcy uchodźców i imigrantów islamskich.
Just before we give you a chance to respond to that, Olivia, you have a question for Commission on this?
You said you had several high-profile meetings with a Polish Prime Minister or Polish ministers, but without concrete results so far. And at the same time, the Polish President says he will contest the European Commission's decision to implement the rule of law to the Court of Justice. Don't you have the strange feeling of being led on by the Polish authorities?
I don't think it was a Polish president who said that. I think it was a leader of the ruling party, I think, who said that, Mr. Kaczynski. I take note of that. I take note of so many things that are being said. The only benchmark for me are the conversations I have with the Polish authorities, and when I talk to them directly and not via the press, the talks are constructive, and we try and find a way out of this. But, you know, it's an internal Polish matter for them to find a way out. The only thing we can do is tell them where the limits are of the rule of law, and I try and be constructive in that. And I have no inclination whatsoever to be part of an internal political debate in Poland.
Do you think that withdrawing or withholding funding from the European Union is a way to have soft power influence within Poland and find a way through this in the longer term?
No, I think we are with our member states in a dialogue on these issues, and I believe in the force of arguments. I believe in the force of dialogue. I do not believe in the force of threats or sanctions. We need to solve this through dialogue. I think there are good opportunities to do that, and I have no inclination whatsoever to react to all sorts of declarations that have been made in the last 4 months. I just do my job, which is to explain legally what the rule of law means and what this means for the position of the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland.
The rule of law framework you acted on today with the opinion, but the next stage has no particular timeline. So this could be a while before anything is actually resolved.
Well, I think Poland has a huge interest in solving this quickly, because the last thing we need in Europe is two parallel legal structures in one member state. And Poland risks that happening if you have, on the one hand, the Constitutional Tribunal and the legal system going in one direction, and on the other hand, the government going in another direction. You know, and this is a wider issue for the application of EU law. We want EU law to be applied in a uniform way all across EU member states. That is important for investors, it's important for citizens, it's important for companies.
Final question. The markets responded very negatively to Poland's constitutional changes. And do you think in the end it'll be money matters which push the change and realign, rebalance Poland's constitution?
Frankly, I think in the end it will be simply rational thinking and common sense that will provide us with a solution in this crisis.
Commissioner, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We've been joined today by Frans Timmermans, First Vice-President of the European Commission. I'd like to thank all our colleagues who joined us from Euranet Plus Network as well. I'm Brian Maguire.